as we talk about unconstitutional changes of governments and other things, there are several things that are important as we reflect on foreign interference. State and nation building, how we transitioned to independence, and the Cold War and how it played out, the use of mercenaries, military coups, and capture and retention of power, and etc. In statistical terms, Chairperson, there were 200 coups in Africa between 1965 and 2012. In the 1960s, there was at least one coup every 60 days. In the 1970s, barely 18 years after Ghana's independence, at least 85% of African states had some coup experience or the other. And West Africa accounted for almost 44% of those. The coups between 1958 and 2008. There was a temporary reprieve in the period post-1990. Some academics have suggested it's because Africa had become more democratic. I want to disabuse you of that notion because it's lazy intellectualism. What had changed was that Western interest in a unipolar world, in changing regimes, had dissipated. The West no longer needed to use force. There was no competitor, either ideological or otherwise. What had essentially happened, there was dominance of one set of interests. So as we reflect on unconstitutional change of government, it's not just mere tinkering at the local level, but it's also what explains the ouster of Nkrumah, the assassination of Lumumba, the assassination of Sankara, the assassination of Amilcar Cabral, the assassination of Samora Machel, the ouster of Sékou Touré. What is the fact? That in a unipolar world, the appetite to change had dissipated. As we see greater polarization between the West, the East, and the Middle, we're going to see once again an intensification of interference. Less than 15% of that interference, Chair, will be justified as follows: protecting and promoting human rights or preventing genocide, protecting lives and property of citizens, fighting terrorism, violent extremism, or stopping some form of unproductive ideology. However, what we know, no intervention happens except it is in the interest and the propagation of the political, economic, social, cultural, racial, and other strategic interests of those who have power. But there are direct consequences, and have been for Africa, which are chaos and instability, retarded development, internationalization of conflicts, regional instability, destruction of cultural and other heritage, as we saw in Timbuktu, destruction of state institutions and public services, warlordism and violent extremism, as we've seen in the Horn and in the Sahel, collapse of the formal economy, and debt, poverty, and inequality, sexual and gender-based violence, and the pillage of our economies. Now, if we imagine in this framing that these are what we're dealing with, what are those channels of transmission? I want to suggest to you, Chair, that the first transmission of interference is an incompetent, corrupt, and ideologically unclear leadership. The second is a structure in the bureaucracy of government and administration that is beholden to the white gaze or to external gaze. Within the public administration, you harvest intelligence and you harvest division.